Hi, I'm Winston Shaw,
And I'm Vedant Sharan.
and welcome to Crossfire. So today we are going to talk about the issue of AI in education, which as high schoolers is a very important issue to us. I'm going to be arguing against its use.
And I'm gonna be arguing for it. So I think I'm just gonna kind of summarize why I feel that AI in education is pretty important. So I just think that AI, this is something it's growing so fast in the present, right? We saw ChatGPT in 2022, and we can see it keeps on getting better, faster and faster and faster and faster, right? This issue is becoming really important, right? And the thing is, in the future, we can see that AI is definitely going to be here to stay in the future, just like how the internet came 20 years ago and it was here to stay then. AI is going to be in the future. So I think that AI in education is really important because we have to teach children how to be able to use AI effectively, how to use it efficiently, how to use it to benefit them. And at the same time, AI is really useful for teachers and stuff like that because AI is really one of the most efficient ways to get a lot of the menial tasks and schoolwork done and leave more time for human interaction. So that's why I feel this way.
So for me, the main issue is human capital. Right now in the education system, teachers are overburdened and underpaid. And the reality with that is that AI is only making these problems worse. The main issue that teachers are facing right now is an epidemic of cheating. And this is seen by teachers across grade levels, but especially in high school where AI is probably used the most. The only thing that AI has done so far is make cheating worse. And the reality with AI detectors is they don't work very well. And the ones that do work for older models.
Mhm.
The nature of AI is that it's advancing so rapidly that detection is always going to be outpaced by new invention. So it's going to be impossible to ever really have good detection. What that forces teachers to do is completely rework their education models to do all sorts of writing in class, all sorts of different assignments. It essentially makes academic integrity when it comes to any sort of out-of-class work impossible. And the problem that comes with that is that students are no longer doing any work with academic integrity. And as a result, they're harming their own futures, and we're going to lose out on human capital invention that comes from the critical thinking developed by that sort of struggle. So,
Yeah. So I think you make some interesting points. I think I want to first talk about what you're saying about how teachers are overburdened and stuff like that, and so, how that's an issue right now. Yeah, I also agree. I think that teachers, they do a lot. They don't get paid that much, but they do a lot of work for our children, whatever. I mean, for us, right? But I think that I feel like AI can help them, right? With AI, AI is just grading papers. It's menial work. Right? You have 100 assignments, grading them all. I think AI can be used as a really good tool for these teachers to speed these processes up. So if they are overburdened, I feel like it can really help them do more with less.
So I think in theory, AI could help overburden teachers, but the reality of models is that they experience hallucinations. And hallucinations make it so if 100 papers have to be graded, right? A certain number of times AI will hallucinate something that isn't true. And as a result, it might grade that paper incorrectly. And what's happened as models have gotten more and more advanced is oftentimes hallucination rates have gotten higher. And what's a result of that is that generally AI engineers think that it's an unsolvable problem. Just because of how AI works, it's a lot of
Right.
pattern mapping and projection of what's going to be the next output. Hallucinations are kind of impossible to solve in that situation, and they seem to be very difficult to even improve as models get more advanced. So I think that kind of makes it hard for it to help overburden teachers. And a lot of teachers believe that since AI has come into education, because they've had to rework their education models, they've actually become more burdened and not less.
Right. I think, yeah, hallucinations, I think you're right. They could always be a problem. But I feel like it's a good, first layer, right? You do your AI grading and you can go back and check and see if it made mistakes. I feel like that could be a more efficient process. And you're basically still double checking your work, double checking the AI's work versus having to do it all yourself in the first place. I think that's going to be more effective overall, though. So I do see what you're saying about hallucinations, but I think that overall with, if you have these papers, you can still grade them faster with that way, though.
Yeah, I think that's true. It can help grade a little quicker, but generally the reworking of education that has to come from that is probably more of a time sink. if you have to do everything in class, there's simply not enough class time, especially at the high school level. There's a reason that high schoolers have to do 2-3 hours of homework a night. It's because there's simply not enough class time to actually get all this material done. And I think that there's been a lot of hype about this example that has sort of shown the probable like success of AI in this Apple Valley high school, or that, I might be getting the name wrong, but it's a high school in Austin, Texas, and it showed an improvement in test scores from AI.
Yeah.
The problem with this example is that at this school, and this is the only school where this has happened so far, is that this is a private high school, costs over $40,000 a year. There's selection effects, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that until this sort of thing is tested at a public school level, it's impossible to actually see if it improves education.
So you're saying that like it's because like inequality or whatever?
I think that when you're talking about a private high school, there's selection effects for probably higher conscientiousness, which is going to be the big barrier when it comes to AI. So conscientiousness being what kind of drive, basically, like how.
So the people are like less motivated to like cheat.
Yeah.
So they're gonna do their. See, but I think if we transition more to like how AI can be used in like cheating and stuff like that, I feel that like people have been cheating forever. Like everyone's like always finding ways to cheat. Like I know from school, like I hear about people doing it, and it's like cheating on it, like everything, right? And I feel like there's always a way to cheat. Like even before AI, people were still cheating with the internet. Like there's always. So I think that like because we were talking about earlier in your introduction how you feel that like it's just gonna make people cheat more, but I think that there's like that cheating is like kind of constant, right?
It might be constant, but there's also degrees to it. And generally over the past 30 years, cheating has been getting worse. It's mostly because of the internet, but especially in the last 2 years because of AI. Before AI was kind of advanced enough to do those types of assignments, you had Turnitin. And Turnitin was able to check for direct plagiarism from the internet, and it was able to compare assignments to past things turned in. It was a solved issue insofar as it remedied that sort of cheating. And it made it much more difficult to cheat if it was used. Not all teachers had adopted it, but if it was used.
Yeah.
And with new AI detectors, it's just not keeping up with new models. So it's harder to solve that issue, and it's going to keep advancing.
So I see what you're saying, but I also think that you gotta account for like class time, right? Class time where you can't cheat because the teacher's watching you, et cetera, et cetera. And I know what you're talking about before, how like teachers, there's not infinite class time, right? Students have homework, but I still think that class time kind of solves this issue, right? Because if you look in the way that like, listen, if you're cheating on all your homework throughout the year, when you get the test, when you get to class time, you have like a timed writing assignment online, or like you're doing some whatever your biology test, or whatever it is. You need to know the material to do the test in class. And it doesn't matter, like if you were a student that cheated on your homework before, like using AI, then come test day, you're gonna fail the test, right? Because you don't know any of the material. So I think that like it's still, there is no like, cheating is not gonna like save your grade really, because like it's not gonna honestly like you cheating with AI, I should say, is not gonna save your grade, because at the end of the day, even though you can still use AI to cheat on your homework, a lot of classes, like, and I know some of my math classes, like test is like 80% of your grade, and like 20% is like homework or whatever. And you're really gonna sacrifice that 80% just to get that 20% perfect score with AI? Like I don't.
And I think you're touching on a good point there, which is it's gonna cause teachers to change their grading models.
Right.
And I think while that's more possible for STEM classes, when you're talking about something like an English class, it's a lot harder to change that model to a grade revolving strictly around testing. Something like an English class is always going to involve a lot of diligent, long-term writing. And that's just something that's impossible to monitor. So I think that it's an issue that can't be solved in the current dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that is true to some extent, but I feel like even with English, like I know this year, like me personally, like we've taken a lot of like time writing things in class, right? Like in preparation for like the AP exam, right? And so like even though we did have some like writing assignments as homework, if you were like cheating, you use ChatGPT all those assignments, you get to class and you don't know how to write this essay, then it's still gonna hurt you even in an English class, because like you're not building those skills, right? I think that's what you're saying, right? That like
Yeah.
if you're using AI, you don't get to build the skills. Well, that's true. But I'm saying you're thinking more like how there's like long-term effects of that, which is true. But I'm saying also in the short term, you're gonna be failing your classes if you're using AI to cheat in this way, which is why like when I think of like involving AI in education, right? Like it's just like I think from like a young age we have to teach these students how to be like responsible with it, right? Because they can clearly see like they can see the cause and effect, right? If they use AI to do their homework, to write these essays for them, all this homework, come test it, they're gonna fail the test, they're gonna have bad grades, right?
I mean, are people seeing that cause and effect though?
What do you mean?
I think a lot of people don't realize the consequences of that sort of use of AI.
I feel like if they see in their grade book an F because they didn't know what the material was, then that's like the consequence to be seen, right?
So let's talk about another issue when it comes to AI. Going kind of back to the example of the Austin school that I was talking about, AI tutors. How feasible do you think that is, and do you think it's the future of education?
I think AI tutors are like another like great tool. See, like I also like I was talking about how AI in general is it's like a more efficient way of doing things, right? With a lot of things like tutors, they can be expensive. They can be like a lot of like lower income families, whatever. They might not have enough money for tutoring, but I think AI can be a great tool for that, right? Like I'm not saying you're gonna replace all of your teachers with chatbots, but I'm saying that like let's say you're struggling in like your algebra class or whatever. Like you're learning with the teacher, but that's not enough. You want some one-on-one attention. You can go home, ask ChatGPT, hey, how do I do this problem? Can you walk me through it? And it can do a great job of telling you how to help you with that. So I think that AI tutors are great for your students, especially like lower income students, because you can support them.
So when it comes to its use in a classroom setting, the problem I think for classroom settings is that when you have a teacher, a lot of times it'll increase their workload if you're using all these different individual AI tutors, again, mostly because of hallucinations. Because a teacher you were talking about might be able to check the work of one AI LLM at a time, but can they check the work of 30 at a time? And if you have all these different students, how many of them are being misled by hallucinations at any given time in a classroom? So the problem still is, how do you work this in a way that doesn't put more work on teachers? Right?
So I think that like with hallucinations, I think that might matter more with like these deeper like writing type of science, but with something. But I think in like a lot of class, like I was with my math example, I feel like math, like AI is pretty good at that. But I do see your point that's going to matter more in some of these other classes with monitoring like all these like students with AI. And I guess, I mean, you just gotta see come test it what's going to happen to the kids, and then you can figure out, you can diagnose the problem. But I think you're right that there could be issues if there's one-on-one students. So I think, so I was thinking more of like an outside the classroom angle, right, with extra support. So that can, help the teachers. But yeah, I think you make a good point there.
Let's move into talking about its impact on non-English speaking students. This is an issue we're both really familiar with because we go to school in Miami, where a very large portion of not only the city's population, but our school's population speaks Spanish as a first language and in their daily life. So a lot of the research that's come out on existing AI models has shown a negative impact on students who don't speak English as their first language. I'm wondering if you think there's a way to solve that problem.
Wait, what do you mean?
Like if there's a way that non-English speaking students won't be hurt by AI.
I think that I don't see so how does AI hurt non-English speaking students?
AI is worse at non-English languages, and it's also poor at translating from English into other languages. And a lot of times when it does translate, that comes with cultural biases. So as an example of that, in Miami, the Spanish that's spoken here is Caribbean Latin American Spanish. But when AI translates into Spanish, a lot of times, even if you specifically ask it to translate into Latin American Spanish, it'll come with some of the biases of Castilian Spanish. So do you not think that puts Latin American students at a disadvantage?
I think we need to look at what the status quo is right now, right? You can see I can see in our school too, there's a lot of a lot of times with ESOL students, English as second language students, right? There's a lot of times a big teacher shortage for them, and crammed in these large classrooms. They're not getting enough one-on-one attention. So I actually think that AI is great for these students because, sure, I mean, I'm sure that there are some of these biases, but we have to remember like the state that they're in right now, where there could be like one teacher that can speak Spanish or whatever, managing like large classrooms, and like these kids, they need a lot of special attention, right? So because it's obviously a lot harder learning a different language. So I think that AI is actually going to be like a great tool for them, because I do think that the benefits here of having that one-on-one personalized feedback when the teacher doesn't have time to go to all these kids, I think that can outweigh any like small chances of like hallucinations or small chances of like these other harms.
I mean, I think the problem is that it's not a small chance of hallucinations, and with a lot of these models, it's still pretty significant. And as these models get more advanced, these chances have been going up in a lot of documented research. So I'm not sure how it reconciles.
Yeah, that's probably true. But so moving on to like, we can look at more how it can affect like equality. Because I was kind of touching on this earlier on how tutoring can help lower income students. So how do you think like AI is going to affect income inequality between students? Because I think it's a big issue, right? That example you're talking about is at a private school, like how it's going to affect public schools and like lower income districts and stuff like that. So how do you, I feel like that AI can be like a great equalizer tool, because you look at like ChatGPT Premium or whatever, it's $20, and you can even use ChatGPT for free. And like there's other free AI services like DeepSeek, et cetera, et cetera. Like there are many free things, and we're looking at like private tutoring that a lot of students have. That's like thousands of dollars. So I feel like that AI can really like level the playing field here.
So in the sense that cost of the AI models won't be a barrier, I agree with you. There are AI models that are very high performance, probably higher performance than any of the high cost models that are free. Mm-hmm. DeepSeek's deep research works arguably better than anything provided by ChatGPT.
Yeah.
However, there is going to be a growing income gap that comes from the motivation gap. And what we already see in outcomes from AI is that students who have this innately high drive, who are already the most successful students, are able to learn how to utilize AI to their advantage very well, and they're able to become more knowledgeable faster. They're able to study better and more efficiently. And then the majority of students end up essentially eroding their critical thinking skills, and they use AI to kind of offload their cognition, and it becomes harder and harder over time. Even if they end up learning in that specific content area, it becomes harder and harder for them over time to engage in problem solving. Right. And that growing gap that comes from the motivation gap, I think will grow income inequality, even though there's not a problem from the actual cost of the models.
So I see how you're saying that's inequality, but like, how does that really tie into the income stuff? So you're saying like the...
Like... I mean, people who have worse problem solving abilities are going to have a harder time finding a job. They're going to have a harder time doing anything entrepreneurial. It's just going to make many parts of life that are necessary for success more difficult for them.
No, I agree with that. But I'm saying that like in like right now, there could be like a kid who doesn't have that much, like family doesn't have that much money, and he does have, what are you saying, like this drive to learn. He has like these creative, whatever, problem solving skills, but he doesn't have like the money to get a tutor or whatever, right? So I think that's what I meant by like income inequality, is that you can help these kids with less money, right?
So I would argue that the internet already largely solved for this issue. There's a lot of free resources available. Khan Academy is pretty well known, but there's anywhere on YouTube, there's resources available to teach all sorts of subject areas. Yeah. Even if it doesn't curtail to the specific problem, when you know how to do the specific type of problem, it's still beneficial to go through that type of problem on a slightly different example. So you learn it on YouTube or Khan Academy or whatever the service is, and then you go through that specific related but slightly different example on your own. And I think that that's already erased a lot of the income-related gaps. And any of the access barriers that exist to the internet today are also going to exist to AI. Even though those access barriers have been reducing, they do still exist. I think that the issues that you're talking about have pretty largely been solved.
I mean, I kind of disagree that they've been largely been solved. When we're looking at like students at these like schools like that, whatever, Texas private school, right? Like these students that are paying like thousands of dollars for like an after school tutor, like for all sorts of things, whether it's like testing or like classes, whatever they may be using for. Like there are many students out there, many services out there that are thousands of dollars, that are very expensive, that are, I mean, hundreds of dollars, even like tens of dollars, like that, whatever. They're out of price for millions of Americans, right? So I think that sure, like YouTube is a good tool. I'm sure it's a great tool. It's helped me. It's helped many people. Like Crash Course, all these videos, they're all useful. But at the end of the day, I think like a professional tutor can do better than just watching a random video on YouTube, right? And I think that an AI bridges that gap. It might be not as good as a professional tutor, but it's gonna be a lot better than a YouTube video.
I mean, the question is how much of the professional tutoring is still provides value and how much of it is just a relic of a bygone era from 10 or 20 years ago where these resources on the internet weren't available to most students. And I think what you find is that a lot of professional tutoring has been becoming less popular in recent years. And that's because services like YouTube, Khan Academy, etc., have kind of acquiesced the need for that.
Right. But I mean, I think I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I know like for like things like the SAT and ACT and stuff like that, like tutoring for that's like a big business right there. I think there's like a lot of students doing it, and it's like I'm pretty sure it's like been proven that if you're getting tutoring, you're gonna end up with a better score. So I think tutoring, it might be less relevant because of the internet, but I think it's still a issue.
I think part of that could be motivation and selection of people who are willing to seek out a tutor are also people who are going to be doing other things that are more likely to improve their score. But I do see your point that tutoring could still be relevant.
Right. I think that's a good point too.
I think we should move on to.
So I was also thinking one thing I was more concerned about, that why I think we need AI in schools, is because AI is just such a growing thing, right? Like I was talking about this a little bit in my intro, right? How AI is, with DeepSeek, like ChatGPT, like these are all like in like 2 years, we have seen like the drastic difference. 2 years ago, like ChatGPT, they could barely spit out an image. Now we can get like big videos and stuff like that, right? And it's going to keep on happening, right? We don't know where it's going to end up. We could end up with AGI, like artificial general intelligence, which can like literally do everything. So I think that like kids in the education system right now, I think whatever 10, 20 years down the line when they're graduating, they're gonna be living in a very different world, right? Like an AI world. And I think that having AI in their schools prepares them for that.
I would say that AI skills are not something that's hard to train on the job. If you look at prompt engineering, I've seen these formats. It's very easy to kind of teach how to design an effective prompt. You do kind of an introduction, and then you do a purpose, and then you do a context dump. It's not a skill that takes kind of thousands of hours and expertise to master. It's a skill that you could probably learn in about a week on a job site. And I think that the same thing translates to a lot of other jobs. I mean, the reality is Excel is used a lot in the corporate world, but in our day-to-day lives in school, assuming that you're not secretary of a club, you're not using Excel very much.
Yeah.
And what jobs do is when you start the job, you get trained on how to use Excel. And I think that in the future, AI could end up being a similar dynamic. I don't think it's necessarily required to teach it in school.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying there. I think that is true to some extent, that a lot of it can be done on the job. But I think it's good to still, build that experience beforehand, right? Let's say you're hiring, like you're applying for a job. Like I remember I read somewhere that like Microsoft, like I think like 71% of their hires, like they look for like 71% of like hiring managers at Microsoft, whatever, they look for AI skills on like the resumes of their applicants, right? And so I think that like having these skills beforehand, it's just a good tool to have. Like just like how, but yeah, I do see what you're saying, how it can be less complicated, but I think that just making sure that everyone gets that baseline can help people with the hiring process and stuff.
Well, Microsoft, I would say two things. One, Microsoft would probably be looking for more AI skills than a median employer just because it's a tech company.
True.
And I would also say that you could teach AI skills in a very narrow capacity without applying it generally to education. Say, for example, you could teach it in some kind of technology course for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and you could teach the basics of how to engineer a prompt, how to use these different models without using it throughout all of education. And that could still be possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, but there's definitely like way to, but I mean, that still is like using in education, right? Like incorporating, like, I know that there's like classes that like prepare us, like was like that personal finance class or whatever. I think it's like required now for students to take. I think like we do have some classes help us with life skills, and I think that some, at least like a unit on AI, that could be useful. But in general, I think AI, like in education as a whole, is still important to like, because students need to understand how to like deal with it, right? Because like what's gonna stop someone like later down the line like this, like using AI like more like recklessly and like, you know, challenge and like not challenging. Like I feel like if with exposure to it earlier, like in a more controlled environment or whatever, in like a school setting,
Yeah.
versus like later on. So what do you feel about that?
I think that is a good point, and digital literacy is important.
Yeah.
Again, I think that could happen in a more narrow capacity, and it doesn't need to be kind of exposed throughout all of education. It could be taught as part of media literacy in general.
Right.
So
I think even if it is, yeah, just talk about media literacy. But I mean, AI is really just gonna always be there, because even if you're not incorporating AI in the curriculum, you're still gonna have kids cheating with AI, right? Because it is one of those cheating tools, just like how kids are always plagiarizing, and how plagiarism is something that we always have to deal with. So I think AI will kind of naturally become, it's gonna be naturally like forced to be incorporated throughout your entire curriculum.
And I want to quickly touch on one last thing.
Yeah.
The impact of AI on educational research, because when you talk about education, one aspect of that is that most colleges double as research institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened with research is a lot of research, the text part of it is not only written by AI, but there's also been an increase in kind of data manipulation. And there's already in research a replication crisis where a majority of published research is unreplicable, which means if the same study was conducted again with the same methodology, it wouldn't show significant results. So how do you think we can reconcile the advance of AI with the replication crisis, given that it seems to be making the problem worse?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point there, right? Because like, yeah, all these universities, I think I read like an article where I saw like a clip or something about just like typing like, yeah, one of those keywords that like ChatGPT always says, that like
Delve.
Yeah, one of those keywords, and like how finding in like 2023 onwards, it's just like appearing everywhere now in research papers. So I think you're right there that AI is becoming a big part. I mean, in the wrong, we don't want it there, right? Because it is hurting our research content, right? But I still think that like, I mean, at the end of the day, that is kind of still, I mean, that's like what context? What do you think? What do you consider that plagiarism, using AI in that way, or it's just like, because I mean,
I think using it specifically to summarize text might not be plagiarism, in the sense of if you have someone who's doing a very specific field of research, they might be able to get help on the writing aspect of their research and be able to take these very complex ideas and boil them down in a more specific manner that people can understand. However, when it comes to it being used for data, I think that's when it becomes a big problem.
Yeah, I think, see, I see what you're saying, but I feel like there's two different parts of this, right? One is just like how helping you with your writing, which is, I mean, depending on how you feel about that, like if you think that's correct or not, I feel like that's its own thing. What you're talking about is more like data fabrication, right? Like just making up data with AI. And I think that's just like, I mean, that's just blatantly wrong, but I don't think that's not a unique problem to AI, right? There's been people, you know, lying about their data forever. I don't think, like, I can see how it can be more common in the AI era, but that's still like a, you know, just a blatant problem. I mean, so I took, there's a class called like AP Research where we write research papers, and I know people that like, you know, they lie, fill out some surveys, and, you know, fabricate their data, or they have like ChatGPT, whatever, make their graphs and make some fake results. But the thing is, like, you can do those without AI anyways. I think that it's not like a unique problem to AI. So
I think regardless of whether you think the impact of AI in education is going to be good or bad, it's very obvious that this is going to have a massive impact. And it's not just going to have a massive impact on education. It's going to have a massive impact on every part of our lives. So I'm glad that we were able to talk about this very important issue today, and I'm glad you were all able to listen. Thank you all for watching.